Okay, hello again, everyone. This is kind of a double header live stream tonight. It's 11:20. I just finished up a few minutes ago doing Revelation from Outside the Box Part 2, talking about the second Exodus in the context of Revelation 12. Now I'm going to jump into the Mark of the Beast, and this was actually by request, and I wanted to get into it now while it's fresh in my brain, so I don't forget to do it and disappoint anybody. So I touched on my thoughts on this in part one of this, and basically I want to take more time to get into it because I did it sort of in passing, and I want to kind of flesh that out more and kind of maybe give a little bit more detail and make a stronger case for what I think it is and what I think it isn't. So with that in mind, let's get started. And of course, this is going to be outside the box, so you're not going to hear anything really conventional. If I have if I have a belief that's in agreement with the mainstream, which I do, sometimes there's really no point in coming on and staying it because it's everywhere. So if I'm going to come on and make a video, it's typically going to be about something that I see that doesn't really reflect in the mainstream. So that's what this is, and I hope it's hopefully edifying, and I hope it's something eye-opening. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to message me on Facebook, comment on YouTube. If you know me in person, talk to me in person. I'll be happy to go over this. And this is going to be one of those things where, some things I talk about are just hard. They just are, and it's like with Yahshua, the disciples, and he was talking about, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, and people just kind of freaked out, and a lot of his disciples left him because they just couldn't get their brains around it. It was hard saying. Um, some of the stuff I'm saying is like that. I mean, it's stuff that sounds on the surface like, whoa, did he really just say that? And my plea is that before you walk away, before you just write me off and think I'm a heretic or whatever, which I've been called that several times over the years. One more time won't hurt. Just study it out. Talk to me, prove it or disprove it. Be a Berean about it. And if you end up disproving me, fine. But in the event that I'm right, I think it's worth taking a look at with an open mind. So that's my plea as I get started here. Stuff I'm going to say, please, if I'm talking something uncomfortable, please don't take it personally. Please just take it for what it is, as a theological discussion and nothing more. Okay. So getting started, the mark of the beast, the number of the beast, the name of the beast, and we all know the scripture. I'm not going to start off in Revelation. I'm going to start off in Deuteronomy. And what I want to do is I want to set up a compare and contrast kind of thing. The mark of the beast. A mark is something that identifies. It's something that labels. Like library books are marked. They have the name of the library on them, so you know where that book goes to. Our vehicles are marked. They have registration plates on them that identify who the vehicle belongs to. I mean, you can just go, ad nauseum on different ways that we mark things in our current society. So we understand a mark as something that identifies possession. It identifies that something belongs to someone. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a look at seeing what the mark is of Yahweh, because the mark of the beast is going to be theoretically opposite of anything that Yahweh would have as the mark. So if the mark of the beast is to the beast and his minions, then it stands to reason that the mark of Yahweh would be the same thing for Yahweh. So, and I'm also going to just say something obvious. A seal, a sign, functionally the same thing. So the words, I think, are interchangeable. In the original languages, they do have different words, but they all mean functionally the same thing. So I'm going to use them interchangeably here. If I don't, I'll let you know, but I probably will just use them just carte blanche interchangeably. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 6. And this is the famous Shema. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the relevant part, if I can get there. And I'm covering some ground that I covered in the first part. And so forgive me if you watch that, and this is kind of like a repeat, but I'm doing this to kind of build a bigger foundation, and maybe people haven't tuned into that, so this is new. So like again, if you watch that, forgive me. This might be boring to you, but hang in there, and I'll get through it. So Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is the famous Shema. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. These words, which I am commanding you today, shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. These words that he's talking about are Yahweh's commandments. This is his Torah. He wants us to constantly immerse ourselves in them. He wants them to be on our heart, which was always his intent. You know, the new covenant, Jeremiah 31, talks about his commandments, his law being written on our heart. That was always his intent. It's not a new thing. So you shall bind them. This is what I want you to pay attention to. Verse 8. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So you've probably seen pictures of Orthodox Jews. They have the little black cube on their forehead, the phylactery, and then they have these bindings around their arms, and they're trying to do this literally. And you know, if you're going to do all this literally, then you have to literally write the commandments down on your doorposts and on your gates. So, you know, not many people do. So anyway, but if you think about what he wants us to do here, you back up, you go, you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Might connotes action. Okay, so I think that he's talking about here when he talks about him being his frontals between your on your forehead. You know, that's obviously your forehead right here, and then on your hand, and your hand is your action. This is what you do, and then your forehead is your mind. So you're thinking about his commandments and you're acting on them, because what does James say? Faith without works is dead. So if all you're doing is thinking about his commandments, meditating on them day and night, all things he just said, but you're not doing them, your faith is dead. It's a pointless exercise. It's futile. So he wants us to not only think about them, but to do them as well. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to go to, I'm going to get into the book of Ezekiel now. And I'm going to read in chapter 9. I'm going to read the whole thing. Well, yeah, I'll read the whole thing. Then he cried out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, Draw near, O executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. Behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his shattering weapon in his hand. And among them was a certain man clothed in linen, with a writing case at his loins. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Then the glory of the Elohim of Israel went up from the cherub on which it had been to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed in linen, at whose loins was the writing case. Yahweh said to him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads, Deuteronomy 6, of the men who sign groan over all the abominations which are being committed in its midst. But to the others, he said in my hearing, Go through the city after him and strike. Do not let your eye have pity, and do not spare. Utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, and women, but do not touch any man on whom is the mark. And you shall start from my sanctuary. So they started with the elders who were before the temple. And he said to them, Defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go out. Thus they went out and struck down the people in the city. As they were striking the people, and I alone was left, talk about a small remnant, I fell on my face and cried out, saying, Alas, Yahweh Elohim, are you destroying the whole remnant of Israel by pouring out your wrath on Jerusalem? So I'm going to stop right there. And I think it's important to note that Yahweh is having a mark put on people's foreheads. What is the mark supposed to indicate? That they're sighing and groaning for the abominations committed in Jerusalem. What are those abominations? They're all related to idolatry, adultery, all types of behavior that he condemns in his Torah. So they have made a choice as a nation under the leadership of the corrupt elders to forsake Yahweh's commandments and forsake his Torah. So that's what Ezekiel is sighing and groaning for, is that the people have turned their backs on Yahweh's commandments and are doing what is right in their own eyes. So if you want to have the mark of Yahweh, that's the character that you need. And you're not going to have that unless you know his commandments to know whether or not people are breaking them and whether you are. And you have to have that zeal, because if it's no big deal, you're not going to be sighing and crying. It's just going to be like, oh, well, whatever, those idiots. That's not the attitude. So that's the second thing. I think I might go into, Micah, or maybe it's Malachi. I think it's Micah. Let's see here. Come on. No, it's Malachi. Sorry. I get them mixed up. Micah, Malachi. Okay. This doesn't specifically mention a mark, but I want to bring this up because in Revelation it talks about the mark of the beast, the number of his name, and the name of the beast. Okay. So this is Malachi chapter 3, verse 16. Then those who revered Yahweh spoke to one another, and Yahweh gave attention and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for those who revere Yahweh and who esteem his name. They will be mine, says Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves Elohim and one who does not serve him. So he's tying in respect, reverence for Yahweh's name with being righteous. And he's saying that there's a distinction between those types of people and the people who don't revere his name. And so in Revelation, we're going to not just talk about in Revelation 13, we're also going to look at the 144,000 and connect the name there. So those are some examples of what it looks like to have the mark or the seal of Yahweh. Now we're going to get into Revelation 13. And the last section I did, the last stream, I was able to get it under an hour. I had been creeping up on previous ones to almost 3 hours, so that was a relief to see that come in under an hour. I'm going to shoot for that again on this one. So Revelation 13. Verse 16, and he causes all, the small, the great, the rich, the poor, the free men, and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So first thing I want to point out here is that it says, here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. He's not talking about going on Google and looking up the number of the beast and just believing whatever it says. So he wants us to actually, dig in and use our brains. The other thing I want to point out, he's talking about wisdom and understanding. Now, this is where we need to use our Bible to interpret itself. If you do a word search for wisdom and understanding, you will see a treasure trove of scriptures, a lot of it in Psalms and Proverbs, that talk about wisdom and understanding in the context of Yahweh's word and his commandments. And so I think he's saying here that you need to have an understanding of Yahweh's words, which at this point, you didn't really have much of the New Testament written by the time Revelation was written. Paul's letters were circulating some of the Gospels, but it wasn't complete. It wasn't canonized for sure. So the scriptures that they were referring to generally were what we call the Old Testament or the Tanakh. And so I think he's kind of saying here, you need to have knowledge of that if you're going to understand what I'm telling you here, if you're going to understand this information. So, I mean, you've got different people who, they try to do gematria and different languages where a letter represents a number. And so they find words, combinations of letters that make names that add up to 666. You get Nero, you get Obama, you get whatever. You can pick a language, you can pick a combination of word. Vicar of Christ is a big one for the to show the Pope. And I mean, yes, you are calculating, I guess, but it's, to me, the way I process the whole end times thing is, if you're the devil and your job is to deceive everyone, it doesn't really make any sense to put something out there that's obvious, because if it's obvious, who's going to be deceived? If all you have to do is look at someone's name, convert it into numbers, and see if it equals 666, you're not fooling anybody. You're just not. Same thing with the mark of the beast. If everybody's looking for a microchip or a barcode or whatever, who's going to be fooled? Everybody's looking for a microchip. Okay, so what happens when there is no microchip, but you end up getting the mark of the beast anyway because you weren't looking, you were hyper focused on one thing? So I think we need to look elsewhere besides conventional wisdom. And I think we need to use the actual Bible to interpret itself. So when we take a look at the number of the beast, when you do a search for 666, it comes up twice. It comes up in reference to Solomon as the number of talents of gold that was brought into him for tribute in 1 year. And it comes up in the book of Ezra as the number of descendants or relatives of a man named Adonikam who came back from Babylonian captivity. That's it. And so, the Solomon connection to me doesn't really seem relevant. Maybe it is to some people. It doesn't really seem like it ties in here. But it's interesting because when it talks about the number of his name, let me see. I didn't do this the last time, but let me go in. Maybe my translation does this. I'm not sure. Let's see here. I'll just pick a random verse. This is the census, okay? The book of Numbers, chapter 1, starting in verse 20. Now the sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, their genealogical registration by their families, by their fathers' households, according to the number of names, head by head, every male from 20 years old and upward, whoever was able to go out to war, their numbered men of the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. So we have an established concept here that the number of a name is the number of people in a clan, in a family, in a tribe, however you want to look at it. Okay, the sons of Reuben, Simeon, Gad, whoever. Okay, so it makes sense. We could say the number of the name of Adonikam is 666. It fits. Okay, so I think that this is pointing us to Adonikam. And Adonikam is interesting because if you look at the name Adonikam in Hebrew, it means basically some variation of my Lord has risen or my Lord rises. It comes from the root Adon, which means master, which translates as Lord. You've heard the term Adonai probably. And so it basically means my Lord is risen or my Lord has, will rise, some variation of that. Okay. And so I think that's interesting because when we get into the trumpets with you have the whole concept of the bottomless pit, right? The angel comes down and unlocks the bottomless pit, and the locusts come out. You have a king over it, named Apollyon, Abaddon. The beast that comes out of the bottomless pit, it talks about. So if you're coming out of a pit, you're rising, right? So that's one possible thing. This could be pointing towards him. I think it could be pointing towards Jesus. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, I mean, who else? I mean, this book was written for us, right? Who is reading the book of Revelation? Christians, right? Followers of Christ. So, Jews don't read it, Muslims don't read it, Buddhists don't read it. We read it, right? Christians read it, offshoots of Christianity, Hebrew roots, Messianic, whatever. We all read Revelation. So it makes sense that whoever he's talking about here is going to be somebody that we have some kind of understanding of. Okay, so when you look at Paul's writings in Thessalonians, Second Thessalonians, whatever it is, where he talks about the man of lawlessness being revealed. Okay, Christianity has taken the historical reality of Yahshua, the son of Yahweh, who was a Jew from the tribe of Judah, and he upheld his father's commandments. He came to unite. Jake, let me go there. Let me go there. I'm going to go to the book of Matthew. I want to show you something, because if you listen to the previous stream I did, I was talking about gathering in the exiles, right? I was talking about the second Exodus. The tribes have been scattered, and Yahweh has a plan to bring them back in. So let me get, I think it's Matthew. Is it Matthew? No, it's not Matthew. Maybe it's Luke. I can see it visually. I'm trying to find where it is. Doesn't appear to be in Luke. It's Mark. I'll find it. It's important, so I want to find it. No, it's not in Luke. It was in Matthew. Well, I'm not finding it, and I'm not going to tie up any more time looking for it. But maybe I did find it. Bear with me just a moment. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. But there is a specific prophecy. If I can find it, I will post it in the comments for reference. But basically, talking about the Messiah gathering, being part of the gathering of Jacob, like I mentioned earlier. And so that's the historical Messiah. He taught the Torah, he upheld the Torah. His disciples kept the Torah. Paul even kept the Torah. You go to Acts 21. He took a Nazarite vow in the temple just to show that he was zealous for keeping the Torah. So that's clear if you have eyes to see it, and you're open-minded about it and can shake off the traditions. So, but the Jesus that the Christian institutional church puts out did away with the commandments, says we can do basically whatever we want. Grace, trumps everything. And so it is a lawless religion in the context of Scripture. Now, it does have laws. It does have, catechisms. It has creeds. It has, confessionals and different things like that, bylaws. Those are all written by man. When it comes to divinely inspired, coming down from the Father himself, commandments, it doesn't have that because it believes they were nailed to the cross. So it is lawless by scriptural definition. And so the Jesus that the Christian church presents is a lawless Messiah. Okay. So when the Christian church says he is risen and they're talking about Jesus, they're talking about the concept of Jesus that's taught in the Christian institutional church. That includes the Catholics and the Protestants. It's all the same. They all agree that he did away with the law, he did away with the commandments, which he said in Matthew 5, don't think I came to do that. Plain as day. So there's a distinction between the historical Yahshua and the concept of Jesus that's taught by the Christian churches. And so I think it's highly plausible that the mark of the beast could be pointing us towards that by singling out Adonikam, my Lord has risen. Because like I said in one of the other streams, every Easter, my Facebook feed is just full of memes. He is risen, he is risen, he is risen. And it's great. He is risen. That's awesome. Okay. But who are they talking about? They're talking about, like I said, this Jesus that's taught in Christianity. They're not talking about the historical Yahshua. The historical Yahshua didn't rise on Easter. Easter wasn't even around. He rose on the Feast of First Fruits after being killed on the day of Passover. So, I'm sorry, but the Jesus that's been put on us by the church is not the Messiah we find in the actual word here. And that's a hard saying, I know. I hope that you can take it for what it is and not let it rock your boat too much. Study into it, because I think that's the linchpin on the whole deception that's coming. I really do. So the number of the beast, tracks back to Adonikam. The name of the beast, now that can be it can be a literal name if you look at it in its Hebraic concept, because this was written, to Hebrews, by Hebrews. Yes, it's in Greek, but whatever. Name means authority, So if I send my son out in my name, he's not coming out and saying my name is James. He's coming out in my authority. Okay. So, it could be talking about the authority of the beast. In other words, they're authorized to do whatever they do. So, that's the name, that's the number. Now, the mark of the beast, this is kind of more interesting to me, because I know the general conception, like I mentioned earlier, did I say conception? The consensus is that the mark is some type of microchip or Bitcoin, digital currency, something like that. Okay, a lot of people think that it's maybe not a lot, but a great many people think that it has to do something with fallen angels, Nephilim, some type of Nephilim DNA markers mixed in with humanity. You have all different kinds of theories. And I think it's just a simple fact of, the mark is something that identifies that you belong to somebody. And when we go into Yahweh's commandments, he specifically says that the Sabbath is the sign between him and his people. Who keeps the Sabbath? Who keeps the seventh-day Sabbath but Yahweh's people in the Bible? Nobody. The Muslims keep it on Friday. The Christians sort of keep it on Sunday, if they even believe in keeping it. So really, the only people that keep the seventh-day Sabbath are Jews and other people who read the Bible and want to do what it says. So you have a clear distinction between a group of people and another group of people. I think in a broader sense, it could also be the mark of the beast, could be compulsory disobedience to any of Yahweh's commandments. At the time of the Maccabean revolt, the Greeks had come in and were trying to Hellenize the Jews in the area. And one of the things they were trying to do, they were trying to force them to eat pork, which is unclean. And some of them died. They allowed themselves to be killed rather than to violate Yahweh's commandments. You had some of the Jews that went along with it to preserve their lives, and Another thing was circumcision. Going back to that, you had they forbid circumcision, I believe. You had a lot of Jews that didn't want trouble, so they had reverse circumcisions. They actually had a process where they could have, without getting too graphic, they would have animal skins attached to themselves to undo the operation. That way, they could, do the games, the sporting events, and whatnot, because they were naked. You got to look like everybody else, and different things like that. So, I mean, the mark of the beast could be something as simple as you can't keep the Sabbath on the seventh day. You have to either keep it on Sunday or not at all. It could be something as you can't circumcise your children because it's a commandment to circumcise your sons on the eighth day. It could be food related. You're forced to eat whatever food. I don't know specifically what it's going to be. My hunch is that it's going to revolve around Sabbath somehow, but I don't know specifically what it's going to be. I do think that you could use things like Bitcoin, digital currency, as a means of enforcing it because it says you can't buy or sell. So, if you know for a fact that someone is a Sabbath keeper, all you do is shut down their account. There's no cash. And if you don't allow bartering, they're stuck. They can't buy or sell. They're being punished. So it's either live with the consequences of that or capitulate. That's kind of it in a nutshell on what I think the mark of the beast, the name of the beast, is. It's not rocket science to me to kind of figure this out. I think it's easier to see what it's not than it is to see what it is. But just putting the connection there that it has something to do with Christianity, I think that's going to be the hardest part for most people to swallow. And let me find the let me go to Paul talking about it. I feel like I need to go there. Second Thessalonians. Okay. Second Thessalonians chapter 2. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Master Yahshua the Messiah and our gathering together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter, as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord is come. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the falling away, the apostasy, comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Now, who in the world is more worshipped than Jesus? Nobody, right? And in Christianity, with the concept of the Trinity, Jesus is worshipped in place of and functionally above his own Father. So it's all about Jesus. You put on K-Love, and so many songs. It's, if they even mention him at all, it's exclusively Jesus. They might talk about God, but it's in the context of Jesus. So the Jesus that the Christian church has exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship. And is it any stretch that if you have, and this is what I think will happen, and I think that at some point Christianity will come to be the dominant force, theocratical type force in the world. And when I say Christianity, I don't mean biblical Christianity. I mean Pauline Christianity, lawless Christianity. I think it will become the dominant force in the world. I think it will be a merger between the Catholic Church and the Protestants. I think that Revelation 13, talking about the false prophet, the second beast, doing the signs and wonders, I think that that's the charismatic movement. That's the glue that holds them together. Because if you look, you had Azusa Street, that was the launch of the Pentecostalism type thing. And then you had the charismatic branch, which was basically launched in the 50s or 60s by the Catholics. And so you have both ends of the schism that have this uniting thing with the Holy Spirit manifestation. And my question is, if all of these churches and all of these people are really being filled with the holy set apart Spirit of Yahweh, Why do they still disagree so much on doctrine? Why do we still have all these denominations? Why do we still have, I mean, why can't they see? And I know that this is, a point of debate, but between people like me and Christians in general, why can't they see the truth of Yahweh's commandments, His Torah? You know, I mean, He said point blank in Deuteronomy 13 that if anybody comes along claiming to be a prophet, and even if what they say comes true, if it leads you away from Yahweh, and that's defined as keeping His commandments, then they're a false prophet. Well, that's exactly what the Christian church has done. Now, I'm not saying you are guilty of that, because we've been lied to over the centuries. I'm not trying to cast aspersions. I'm not trying to insult. I'm not trying to condemn. I'm trying to educate. We have been lied to. We've been sold a bill of goods that our Christ, our Messiah, did away with His Father's commandments, did away with the commandments given at Mount Sinai. And which, if you look at it logically, and I've made the point in other videos, it's actually Him that gave the commandments at Mount Sinai. So when He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, He's talking about those commandments. So is it too much of a stretch to say that someone comes along claiming to be Jesus with signs and wonders and all of these things that look like it, and he's espousing Pauline Christianity? He's a man of lawlessness, and he says that he's God, and he comes and sits in the temple of God. Maybe at some point they have the Ark of the Covenant, or I think maybe a fake set up, and he comes in and sits on it because it's the mercy seat, which is actually a mistranslation. It actually means lid if you look at it literally. It never says anything about a seat of mercy. It's a covering. Yes, it does say that Yahweh's glory sits on it above the cherubim, but it never describes it as a mercy seat. So I think it's entirely plausible that we could have a guy coming along claiming to be Jesus, doing, with the lying signs and wonders, preaching lawlessness. Because if you think about it, if we have no commandments, if we have no laws, okay, at least of a, we have this idea that if you actually do what the Bible says, you're a fundamentalist. And the Pope came out a few years ago and actually said that religious fundamentalists are violent. They're violent extremists. And he said, regardless of if they commit physical violence or not, they're still violent. And so the UN, the papacy, different world organizations have gone and just unanimously labeled fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, people who do what their book says, as extremists and therefore a threat. We see it with Islam, fundamentalist Islam. They're the terrorists, right? They're the threat. And then we see it in America. We hear about, we hear about the radical Christian right, and they're the biggest threat, and all this. Well, I mean, you don't get any more biblically fundamental than going back to Yahweh's commandments. You don't get any more fundamental than going back to Sinai. You just don't. Fundamental Baptists ain't got nothing on this. I mean, come on. So is it that much of a stretch to say that a lawless Messiah who comes in looking like the real Messiah, he passes the Pauline Messiah test and dupes most of the people that identify as believers, because it says that even the elect might be deceived? I don't think that's that big of a stretch. I really don't. And I know it sounds radical to say that the Antichrist is Jesus, but I see it. I really do. We'll keep going. This is verse 5. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things? And you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he will be revealed. For the mystery, the secret of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he's taken out of the way. Then that lawless one will be revealed, whom Yahweh will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his. The one who's coming is in accord with Satan. with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they will believe what is false, in order that they may all be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. Let me let you in on a little hint. If you go back and you let the Bible find its own terms, this is defined as obedience to Yahweh's commandments. Wickedness is defined as disobedience to Yahweh's commandments. We're not talking like one-time, mess up sins. We're talking about a lifestyle kind of thing. Okay? So if you believe that the law has been done away with and you don't keep the law, by definition, you are practicing wickedness. Now, I don't think you're doing it maliciously. I don't think you're doing it with an evil heart. We've been deceived. So, and let me go back to Deuteronomy, because what does he say? In order that they may all be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness, talking about the Torah. We're going to go back to Deuteronomy, and I'm going to give you the Bible's definition of truth. Deuteronomy 6, we're going to go back there again. I'm sorry, that's righteousness. Truth. That's in Psalms. I mean, they're kind of equivalent, but Psalm 119 is a massive psalm. I always forget which verse it is. Yeah, I'm scanning and I'm not seeing it. But in there, he specifically says that Yahweh's word, his Torah, his commandments, is the truth. Okay? And there are multiple witnesses throughout Scripture that bear that out. So when Paul's talking about, the truth there, I think it's very reasonable to say that he's talking about that, that concept. Let me get back into 2 Thessalonians. Okay. Yeah, that's all I'm going to read from there. But I mean, let's think about this logically, okay? Now, I missed something when I was talking about the mark of the beast, the 666. If you go in and you look in the Greek, you see 3 Greek letters, okay? Go online, do a search for 666 Islam. You'll find websites that show you those 3 Greek letters, and they compare them to what's called the Bismillah. The Bismillah is basically like a logo or like an inscription in Arabic having to do with Allah. They look remarkably similar. Remarkably similar. So similar that many have drawn the conclusion that when John had his vision at Patmos and he saw those 3 Greek letters, he wasn't actually seeing the Greek letters for 666. He was actually seeing the Bismillah. And because he didn't have any concept of Arabic, he wrote it the closest way he could in Greek to make it look like the actual Arabic that he saw. Now, that's gaining traction. You have more and more people who are believing that. And especially as we see the rise of Islam and we see its antagonism towards the West, it's looking like increasingly, Antichrist, right? Against Christ. Who's more against Christ than Muslims, right? They're over there beheading Christians right and left, supposedly. And they're the antithesis of Christianity. And so when you have this other witness, that actually says that, wow, the number of the beast is actually pointing towards Islam, it reinforces the case that Islam is the beast. Okay, so you have theories that, Erdogan in Turkey is the beast. This 12th imam that's apparently coming on the scene at some point is going to be the beast or the Antichrist. And my question is, if everybody's going to be deceived, who in there? Remember, Revelation was written for the believers. Who reads Revelation except for Christians and their offshoots, right? So who's going to be deceived by Islam? Really? Islam's just going to sneak in there and deceive a bunch of Christians as being, as being. I mean, anti means, it can mean opposed to or against, but it can also mean in place of. So nobody's going to be deceived by an Islamic beast, okay? And so I don't think that's what it is. And Catholicism, the Protestants for hundreds of years believed it was the papacy was the beast. And they broke down 666 as being from gematria, like in Latin or whatever, for Vicar of Christ or whatever, and they found different ways to identify whichever pope, the papacy in general. And so to me, if you have so many people looking for it and believing it, where's the deception? But if the Antichrist is actually a Christian, if the Antichrist comes on the scene, and I'll when I get this video done, I'll link to Steve Berkson's video on it. I posted it on my Facebook several times, but he talks about how we know that the real Messiah, when he comes, is going to battle and defeat the Antichrist, right? That's obvious. We all agree on that. That's obvious. So if you really want to fool the people and deceive everybody, you need a fake Antichrist. Okay? You set up a fake Antichrist. Let's say it's Islam. Let's say it's the Mahdi or whatever, right? He's the fake Antichrist. Everybody says, oh, the Antichrist. Then you have Jesus come along. And when I say Jesus, I mean the Pauline Christian version of Christ, not the historical Torah-keeping Christ. He comes on the scene and mops the floor with the Mahdi. Well, isn't that what the Christ is supposed to do, is to defeat the Antichrist? So by default, he is now the Antichrist. And if he does the stuff that Paul's talking about, it makes sense that at that point he would come in and do that. Now, having just defeated Islam, who is fundamental at its core, an Islamic terrorist and everything, he says, we're not going to do that again, guys. We're not going to get swept up in this fundamentalism where you have to do all these do's and don'ts. This is grace, okay? And then, peace, right? That's going to bring about peace, because you're not going to have people saying, well, it says to do this in the Bible and you're not doing it. Everybody's just going to get along, right? Because it's grace, it's do whatever, okay? It's lawlessness. To me, that makes total sense as a way to sell the real Antichrist. And then the real Messiah, who upholds the commandments, comes in and eventually deals with the man of lawlessness. Now, obviously, I don't think that the Antichrist will be Jesus literally, okay? Because Jesus is a concept. Yahshua is the real person. He's the real Son of Yahweh, the only begotten Son of Yahweh, who walked in flesh, walked among us, died on Passover, resurrected on the Feast of First Fruits, ascended to his Father. That's the real deal. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about Jesus, this Christian construct, this idea. Okay, if somebody comes on the scene as a bodily personification of that idea, there's your real Antichrist. And I really think that the mark of the beast, the number of the beast, point to it explicitly. I really do. And if he upholds Christianity and says we're not keeping the Sabbath anymore, guys, and whatever, it could be one of two things. He could say, you're not doing it on the seventh day, you're doing it on the Lord's day, on Sunday. Well, right there, you're being forced not to keep one of Yahweh's commandments. Okay. Or he says, we don't keep the Sabbath anymore on any day of the week, which is what most Christians do now. Okay. Either way, you're being forbidden from keeping the actual holy Sabbath, the one that Yahweh ordained as holy at creation. So that's kind of a almost an hour-long explanation of where I'm at, my understanding of the mark of the beast, the number. I think it points towards Christianity. I really do. And I'm not saying that, Christians are wicked, Christians are evil. I'm not condemning individual Christians, but the system as a whole that's been handed down to us is lawless. And it makes perfect sense that the leader of that lawless religion is going to be the man of lawlessness. It makes perfect sense. So I'll leave links to the video I mentioned when I'm done. You can check it out. And again, I just pray that I know that this is one of those hard things, and I just hope that you can look at it in an open mind. If you have questions, please, 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 please talk to me. Ask me. If you're a family member that watched this, give me a call. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it on Facebook, however you want. I don't want hurt feelings. I just want education. That's my only goal here, is to educate and to open eyes and to present a perspective of what I think. Because I've said before, if mainstream eschatology has us looking over here for the Antichrist, it makes perfect sense for the devil to bring him in over here. That's all I'm saying. Over here is Christianity. Who's going to be looking for a Christian Antichrist? Who's going to be looking for Jesus to be the Antichrist? Right? I mean, almost nobody. I know I'm not the only one who sees that, but there are very few that do. And so, to me, that right there puts it up towards the top of possible candidates for what's coming. Just the fact that so few actually receive that. So I'll leave you with that. It's after midnight. This is the second one I've done, and I'm under an hour on this one too. That's great. Instead of going over 2. So I'm gonna head to bed, and I hope you guys have a good Sabbath, a good Saturday, and shalom to you, blessings in Yahshua's name. Hallelujah.